This is the morning sports desk for Wednesday, the 24th of January. My name is CJ Baumgartner. Corey Techman, my co-host on the MSD podcast today. And Corey, we got a lot to talk about locally here. If you include St. Paul as local, which I will for the sake of today's episode.
Yes,
but first,
from St. Paul to Fargo to points in between, I think is
our first
tagline, isn't it?
Yeah. So let's go in between right now as we talk about along Highway 10 from St. Paul to Fargo, about halfway, kind of, if you don't think about it that hard. Verndale and Wadena Deer Creek meet up in a boys basketball matchup, a Park Region Conference matchup last night. I had that game on KWAD, and I talked with both coaches pregame, and Coach Thunberg said, hey, we want to go fast. We want to get in transition. We want to turn this into a little bit of a track meet here. And talking with Coach Greg Johnson before the game, he said, I think our rebounding, he really needs that to be kind of a focal point in that game. He said he was, if Wadena Deer Creek, which they love to play man-to-man, was going to play in man-to-man, he said actually feels pretty good. He feels like this team has gotten really, really good at getting their offense going in man-to-man. And I asked him before the game, I said, what's one of the things that you love most about this team that you have, and what excites you? I said, what excites you about this team? And he said their energy and the fact that they get up every day, and they had 2 wins coming into this point in the season, but they get up for a rivalry game like this, and they consider Wadena Deer Creek a rival. And, as a former Park Region Conference guy and somebody who played with some Verndale athletes myself when I was in baseball for Bertha Hugh at Verndale, those guys get up to play, and they're competitors, and they competed in that first half, having a lead for parts of it. 10 seconds before halftime, Verndale had a lead, a 2-point lead, a 1-point lead with a free throw by the Wolverines. And then 28-27, they were in front. Peyton Church hits a NBA 3 at the buzzer. And then all of a sudden Verndale's trailing at halftime, but they were getting the rebounding done. Carter White made a few threes in that first half, a few other timely shots by the Pirates. They also were able to get those offensive rebounds and get some putbacks and make it a little interesting going into halftime. But then in that second half, and this has been the story for the Wolverines all season long, they've been a defensive team. Coach Thunberg has been very open about that, and the fact that they're a second half team. They really lock it in. And I talked to Coach Thunberg about that pregame. I said, what has been kind of the secret to why your team plays really good defensively in the second half? And he said, we just adjust really well. Coming into a pregame, we're looking at stopping X player, and Y player decides to have a big game in response. So, okay, let's shift. Let's take out Y player now. And they've been able to do that successfully. They started off the second half, Corey, on a 15-2 run. And from that point on, put the game away. So overall, it was a fun night of basketball. Verndale kept it close. And the Wolverines now have won 5 in a row. They're 6 or 7-0 on their home floor for Wadena Deer Creek. It was overall a fun night of basketball for the first half of the game. That second half of the game, a little more slanted towards the Wolverines. But I think both teams will walk away getting what they wanted to get out of that night.
Yeah, good, fun rivalry game, like you mentioned. We don't have anything on our broadcast schedule tonight. It's Wednesday night. We rarely have anything on Wednesday nights. But the big news in the state, we don't want to focus on anything local anymore because our guy, your guy, my guy, everyone's guy.
All our guys.
Joe Mauer, a first-ballot Hall of Famer. Isn't that incredible? It's incredible.
It's great. I mean, so this is something that I just saw last night. Joe Mauer is here's your local connection. Joe Mauer is the first player taken number 1 overall to play for his hometown team. And I know it's the Minnesota Twins, but he's the first player to have played for his hometown team, being selected number 1 overall, play 15 plus seasons with that one team, and go to the Hall of Fame. It's crazy.
I mean, there can't be that many of them that ever have had that situation.
No.
So the fact that
for everything to go right in that story.
Yeah. For that entire situation to even exist in the first place is already a minor miracle. I'm just so happy he made it. I know it was by the skin of his teeth. That doesn't matter because by golly, he's in it. We were chatting a little bit last night, as a matter of fact, kind of texting back and forth about hey, have you heard what have you heard? And sharing some stories. I'm sure you came across a lot of things. Just before you sent the video to me, I just finished watching this really cool Max Scherzer story
Yes.
that came out in relation to Joe Mauer. Really kind of cool. I like what I like about the Hall of Fame, and what I like about now, especially having it be one of my favorite players ever, is the lore that exists around these guys.
These guys become myths.
You knew it existed, but now you get to hear why it existed. And I'll let you share it, but Max Scherzer's story and kind of the evolution of him becoming the dominant pitcher that he turned into was because he couldn't get Joe Mauer out.
Yeah, so first of all, Max Scherzer is a guy who will be a first ballot Hall of Famer, Cy Young winner, multiple-time World Series winner now with the Nationals and with the Rangers. That guy is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer in his own right. And there's a story on MLB Network. They were getting ready, and you kind of knew that they were going to be, that Mauer was going to sneak in based on the way that they had Justin Morneau on, and he did a great bit talking about Joe Mauer. And then they had Tom Verducci, who's a big Sports Illustrated baseball writer, obviously one of the Hall of Fame voters. He voted for Mauer, and he had this great story about Max Scherzer, who, again, one of the most dominant pitchers of the last 10 years in Major League Baseball, and he had to invent a new pitch. He had to add a cut fastball to his repertoire just to get Joe Mauer out, just to make sure that it would cut inside and Joe Mauer couldn't get his hands around on it. Joe Mauer had no idea it was coming. This was in 2014. So these guys have already faced each other for a few years already, back when Scherzer was pitching for the Tigers, and they faced each other more often. But he had such a tough time getting Joe Mauer to strike out that he had to basically develop a cut fastball solely to get one specific hitter out. And that was Joseph Mauer.
And that might have been a turning point in Scherzer's career that led him to become one of the most dominant pitchers of his generation. I love the folklore, the tall tale, the Paul Bunyan-esque stories that start to exist, that start to come to light about these players. They're all things that we think we know, right? As baseball fans, whatever, we think we know these things about Mauer because we get to watch him every day.
Right.
And you hear things kind of secondhand, like Dick Bramer will tell a story, or Bert Blyleven would tell a story. He'd relay kind of in code things he's heard from other people throughout the broadcast. The radio guys would do the
Did it kick you off?
kick me off.
Hey,
Since I'm here, do you have a particular Joe Mauer story that you remember from his time? They're like, oh, I like this guy.
Yeah. All right. So for those listening on the audio version, our internet stream is having some issues, but yeah. So here, there's so many different things about Joe Mauer. And like you talked about, Corey, it takes on this mythical status with everything. And there's no maybe like specific Joe Mauer story that sticks in my mind. There's obviously his final game, and I think his final game kind of Joe Mauer's final game kind of takes over in the lore. Is he was able to get the double, and you could see it in his eyes that he was hustling to second base. He wanted that extra base hit. He slid in safely. He got everything. He got to have his last moment as a catcher and take that one pitch. That's, I mean, obviously a highlight. But in terms of the prime of Joe Mauer's career, I mean, I'll remember a few different things. One is that time in 2006 when I just got into Twins baseball. I was not like, I barely knew who the players were. I knew what baseball was, but I wasn't, as 2006 is what got me fully onto the Minnesota Twins and the success of that season. I remember hearing that last game of the season, and everybody, people who didn't really follow baseball, were talking like, Joe Mauer's, he's got to get this many hits to get the batting title. And hey, here's what Derek Jeter is doing in New York. Is he going to get the batting title? And I remember that race going on because Joe Mauer, catcher, never wins the batting title. This never happens. And that was a fun one. But 2009 is really when you got to see Joe Mauer's prowess get put on full display. I mean, that guy missed the first month of the season. I remember watching that, and it was a team that desperately needed Joe Mauer back. And his very first at bat, he hits a home run. And I remember I was on a field trip. It was the 5th grade. I went down to the state capitol. We were on our way back, and all I remember is my mom picking me up and getting home and turning on the Twins game because we got home at like maybe 8 o'clock. So the game was probably about 3-4 innings in, and everybody just couldn't stop talking about how Joe Mauer in his first at bat hit a home run. And it led to 28 more home runs that season and an MVP campaign for the ages. So I don't know. I mean, those are kind of a few of them, but there's no like one iconic Joe Mauer moment. I mean, maybe you could say the diving play he had from Brett Gardner at Yankee Stadium when he kind of punt faked Brett Gardner and sprinted to the plate and dove and got him out. That there's the classic play of him at Nationals Park, kind of off that stone in the back, just not even looking, flicking his glove back and kind of backhanding it. And the Nationals broadcast lost their minds. There's so many different things that equates to Joe Mauer, but there's no top moment, but those are in that upper echelon for me.
If it were basketball, you would say Joe Mauer's bucket. Like you just could count on him putting an at bat together. He looks silly so rarely. I have one. This is very. It's a silly story, but when I was in college, I don't remember. It was early. It was young in his career. I was meeting people. It was the fall. I was meeting people for the first time as a freshman in college, and he's one of my best friends still to this day. He was one of the best men. He was one of the best men in my wedding, and we became friends around a Joe Mauer situation. I don't remember who they were playing. I think it was Seattle. It doesn't matter who they were playing, but I like to play cribbage. I found out he liked to play cribbage. So we were playing cribbage in his dorm room, and we had the Twins on, and Joe Mauer was up, and whoever was on first base took off towards second, and we're like, uh-oh, and then Mauer ripped the ball through the hole. It was just like a perfectly executed hit and run with the shortstop covering, and we both probably overreacted and lost our minds. And like we reacted the same way to loving cribbage, and we reacted to the same thing happening in baseball because we liked baseball the same way. Like I'm friends with this guy still to this day, probably because Joe Mauer perfectly executed a hit and run against and 4. It's just so silly. And I think about that. I think about the catch behind the net that he made.
Yes.
Such an unbelievable play.
Bramer's called great on that, by the way.
Your 2009, you said he hit a home run. He hit, I think, 13 home runs that month. He just went ballistic. And I don't know, I'm just so happy he made it. It's really quite simple. It's really quite simple. He's one of my all-time favorite players to watch. And he's like literally the dream.
Right.
I wanted to play for the Twins when I was growing up. And then here was this guy, he's not that much older than me, he was doing it. And then him and his wife, they had freaking twins. Like you couldn't write it. You just couldn't write the story. I think it's pretty special.
So first ballot Hall of Fame catchers, Joe Mauer enters company with Johnny Bench and Ivan Rodriguez.
Oh,
Pretty-
yeah, Pudge.
Pretty good company for those catchers. And Joe Mauer is just, there's a video of just, it has a guy who's just on repeat, and it's Mauer hitting the ball, whether it's him pulling it, whether it's him hitting it the other way. His swing, man, his swing was just beautiful. It's, that guy is just we throw the term pure hitter around a lot, I think, just generally speaking, but Joe Mauer's a pure hitter. That's just a guy who finds a way to get the bat in a good position on the baseball. That guy knows the strike zone. He knows what to do. There's a story told on Twitter yesterday by other Hubbard employee, Phil Mackey, and because he used to be on the Twins beat for a few years. And I'm taking this right off of Twitter, but he was talking about in 2013, Aroldis Chapman was coming on the scene in Cincinnati, and he was throwing 105 miles an hour back before that really became commonplace in baseball. Like throwing 97 was a heater. Now throwing 97 is like, above average. But like, he was able, against Aroldis Chapman, he fell behind 0-2 in the count. Joe proceeded to foul off 4 pitches. He spit on 3 more off the plate. So got the count low. Head home run, and the Twins would end up winning the game. And afterwards, here's what Joe Mauer said. Somebody asked him, Joe, how were you able to work your way back in that at bat? And he basically said he wasn't throwing his breaking ball for strikes, so he eliminated that pitch out of his hand. He said he was basically just sitting fastball, and people guy was a number 1 overall pick as a baseball player. This guy was going Bobby Bowden, the coach at Florida State, all-time Hall of Fame college head coach. He said Joe Mauer was the greatest high school quarterback prospect he'd ever seen. He was going to go play quarterback for him if he did. Twin his entire career and be a first ballot Hall of Famer. All right, well, we are working things back again, having some internet issues today, but it's just a lot of fun with Joe Mauer and to get to hear some of this stuff. And we'll talk more about it. We want to have some guests and we want to be able to do some things as we go over again, this kind of mythical status that it takes on now that he's into the Hall of Fame. One last thing I want to talk about on the sports desk. The Timberwolves are hosting the Washington Wizards tonight in Washington. That's a 6 p.m. tip-off. Mike Conley just added to the injury report, said he'd been dealing with a little bit of things, according to Chris Finch, even when he sat out that game against Charlotte on Monday night. That wasn't just rest. That was a little so let Mike Conley take all the time he needs to get healed up, okay? This has been the Morning Sports Desk for Tuesday, January 24th.